Hi, this is Seema Arora, and this is a podcast on sustainability, climate, business, economy, and tech. In today's podcast, I want to talk about the rogue agents of Anthropic and OpenAI, and especially Anthropic. These incidents raise some very basic questions about security, responsibility, and just basic common sense. Now, there were three separate security breaches. First, as recently reported, the UK government funded research group AI Security Institute tested Anthropic's Mythos 5, and in the most serious case, the model tried to insert malicious code into a real open source project. It researched the maintainers, created fake identities, pressured a real person to approve the code, and then tried to make some of its earlier activity look harmless when it was challenged. This was not technically a sandbox escape because the model had been given internet access, but it still acted outside the confines of the permitted boundaries of the test. Second, there was the OpenAI Hugging Face incident, where OpenAI models were being tested on a cybersecurity benchmark inside what was supposed to be an isolated environment. The models found a vulnerability, moved through the testing infrastructure, reached the internet, and compromised Hugging Face's production systems. And this was because it wanted to gain information that would help them perform better on the benchmark test. In other words, they found a way to cheat on the test. There were Anthropic's incidents with Irregular, an independent cybersecurity evaluator. Now, this is where, there's a series of problems that emerges. The Claude models had been told they were operating inside simulated exercises without internet access. But because of a misconfiguration, quote unquote, they actually had access to the public internet. The Opus 4.7 attacked a real company and accessed production data. Those 5 uploaded a malicious package to the real software registry, where it executed on 15 systems. And another research model from Anthropic scanned thousands of internet targets and compromised a real company before recognizing that it had moved outside the simulation. Now, these have been characterized as operational errors. Interestingly, the consequences are still real. And this brings me to my main question. If these models are powerful enough to compromise websites, create fake identities, discover vulnerabilities, and manipulate real people, why are they being tested with access to the public internet? Why is there not an air gap? Now, for highly sensitive applications, especially in the military, there are very strong ways of executing an air gap whereby the machines are completely isolated from the internet and have no way to escape. This is basic security 101. Of course, the researchers need to test these models with real tools, but there should be a sequence of doing that. First, with an air gap and having the robust testing done. Second, go into an simulated internet environment and then connect with real world partners with, provide their test sites and not just their production data, which can be hacked in real time by these models. So you do not simply give a powerful AI agent internet access and hope it understands the boundaries. And this makes the actions of Anthropic particularly irresponsible. We heard that Anthropic found vulnerabilities, earlier and had this project Glasswing in which it invited willing participants to partner with when it discovered all these cyber vulnerabilities based on authorized software, willing partners, human validation. That was done earlier. But these incidents, which are being now disclosed, where Anthropic basically is not even taking responsibility for its models and just saying, well, there was a misaligned or a misconfiguration in the tests, a misconfiguration, a company that has billions of dollars in funding is relying on a third party software vendor, and in fact, even blaming it that that was the cause for why its models escaped into the internet. Why is there not an air gap? Again, the question is important. If you are going to have these very powerful models, you better test them in your own environment securely, just like you would treat it as a military application, because your models are very powerful. And secondly, when they do go out and hack, just declaring we voluntarily disclosed to these companies that they were hacked and that, we've been very responsible, and we are so responsible that we take it upon ourselves to protect these companies. We're not even going to disclose their names. This is too much of regulation being completely, it's like we at Anthropic know exactly how to handle this. We are taking responsibility. We've talked to the companies. They were not aware. We brought it to them voluntarily, and guess what? That wipes all our responsibility from the fact that actually these websites were hacked. Now, if you go to the computer hacking laws, those are, even though they are federal, they do not bring any responsibility when these so-called hacks are unintentional and there is voluntary disclosure, which, all of these, Anthropic is following that kind of legal playbook, or because the law hasn't caught up to the fact that these models are actually going out there in the real world. So will the legal side of things kind of wake up here and assess the laws? Because, guess what Dario has said? We love AI regulation. And so this might be the place to start. Let's impose punitive damages on these frontier AI labs when their agents go rogue. And that, they must be accountable, even though intentionally they're not doing it. They're letting their agents run loose. And then for them to say, well, our models were going and, in a sense, as if they are separated from the company. They belong to you. So when that happens, you should be held accountable, given the billions of dollars in funding. And again, we're having all these companies which have declared there was this misconfiguration. This term has been used by Anthropic. It has been used by OpenAI and recently by Meta in terms, and they have the same vendor, cybersecurity startup. And at the end of it, they are saying that we are going to write a white paper after hacking into production data of websites. This is unheard of. And given that, these labs are saying, let's regulate. And of course, they are referring to the Chinese companies and against open weight models. Why don't we start by regulating that if there is any hacking in the production data of companies, then there should be punitive damages on these frontier labs. And to avoid that, it's very simple. I don't think that there is anyone who hasn't heard of an air gap, especially for mission critical applications and model testing. So it's easy to do, but if you don't do it, then please be prepared for punitive damages, because this hacking should be considered as if it were a real hacking. So that's one thing. The second thing that is very troubling about Anthropic and the likes is obviously, with the advent of open weight models and the way they are proliferating, because of the fact that their pricing is so much lower than what we are finding with these models. 2 orders of magnitude cheaper. DeepSeek has been releasing their numbers. Kimi K3 also not as cheap, but significantly cheaper than these models, really puts a dent into the projections that, these companies will be able to recoup their billions of dollars in debt for $1 trillion IPO valuation. So, and the fact that these security incidents are coming out, just seeing the tip of the iceberg. Of course, in all this, everyone is thinking, well, what about Google? We've seen a lot of defections from Google into places like Anthropic. I think those people should be questioning those decisions, because Google is poised to be successful one way or the other. It has too many profitable infrastructure layers, application layers that are making a lot of money for them. And, again, with a pipeline of, they might have come late to the game. Some of the defections that we saw this week, for example, Jeff Dean and Sanjay Gemawat and, their team of it's a team of four people, doing a startup of, it's called Discovery Loop. That is a legitimate kind of way for people who are very senior to then say, okay, what is the last thing that we really want to do that will change the world? So I think along those lines, that makes sense. But on the other hand, Google has still got much deeper pockets and that they are playing with their own money. Google is going to be successful, but Anthropic and OpenAI have billions of dollars in debt. And now with the pricing looming, and the models being able to do as well, seems like there will be a tougher battle for them to, or uphill battle. And as regards security, I think Anthropic's stance that it can get away and kind of define the regulation market. The regulation on its terms needs to be challenged. And it needs to be challenged. And we're standing on very firm ground here. The security of testing your powerful models without an air gap does not make sense to me. And the fact that when these find a way to the internet and attack the production systems of companies, just voluntarily disclosing it is, it's not a good strategy, because sooner or later, companies will wake up to that, and the AI regulation that you are so yearning for. And of course, you want another kind of regulation, but this is very important and it might be on the books again sooner rather than later, because the consequences of hacking in the real world usually are not very good. And so I think there is reason to believe that with these two frontier labs, the security lapses must be addressed sooner. And the fact that their pricing, they're no longer able to charge that much because of the general superintelligence price going down is a real factor, and that Google still has many more advantages. The one top advantage is that it is playing with its own money, investing its own money, and it has many avenues of profitability ahead of it. With that in mind, this is Seema Arora, and thanks for listening.